And now, Spotlight Montana with Laurel Staples.
A major heat wave is headed to Montana, a region already experiencing significant drought conditions. In this Spotlight Montana, we're working for you to find out what you should prepare for, safety precautions to take, and how you can help. Experts with the National Weather Service in Missoula also explain the impacts of the heat wave, what concerns them the most, and they also break down Montana's drought outlook and fire weather forecast.
Okay, hi, my name is Marty Whitmore. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist here at the National Weather Service in Missoula.
And describe what you do in that role.
Well, that's a good question, Laurel. What do I do? So I'm essentially the main liaison, if you will, between the Weather Service and all our partners, and even the public to a certain extent, but we have a direct connection with the public. But partners like fire weather managers, avalanche managers, road managers, many of us here in the office, we perform that direct point of contact with those managers, but then I help shepherd all those programs along, making sure they're on the right track, coordinating with them all the time, trying to figure out what they need from us, how early in an event do they need it, just so we have a good communication with all our partners and we understand their needs and they understand how to best use us as a resource. So that's really my role.
All right. Thank you, Marty. And Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Ray Nicholas. I'm the hydrologist for the National Weather Service here in Missoula, Montana. And my position is a little bit similar to Marty's. I'm in charge of anything related to water across, western Montana and north central Idaho. And I work closely with, the local counties, any federal, state agencies, and, just have a big function as far as any water related stuff, as far as drought, water supply, flooding, anything related to surface water.
Well, and what I wanted to talk about first is really what we're facing right now in the forecast, what looks like a historic heat wave that's coming our way with triple-digit record-breaking numbers, and it's still June. So your thoughts on this happening?
Well, you titled it pretty well there, Laurel. Historic heat wave is what it looks like. And we've messaged heat already a couple times this spring when we had some unusual heat for early in the spring, but this one has a little bit different flavor. This is a very strong upper level ridge that's building over the west, and it's bringing heat that we're not only concerned about the magnitude. We certainly will likely hit 100 degrees here in many of the valleys. We're worried about the length of time that this heat wave is going to hang around. And we're also worried about how warm it could stay at night. The nice thing about living in the dry West is you usually cool off pretty nicely at night. This one often, I think, will stay up into the 60s. Maybe, some valleys could stay at 70 degrees overnight. So it makes it tough to recover from. And certainly we're not experts on health, but we try to relate our products to health concerns. And certainly they've done studies on it's often, it's not just how hot you get during the day, but it's can you cool off in between at the nighttime periods. So we're really worried about that. We'll start ramping up our heat over the weekend, but our dangerous heat, I think, is going to be probably focused Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Mm-hmm. But the models are showing we could still be well into the 90s and even hit 100 degrees Thursday and Friday of next week. It's a long period of this. It's probably going to be even worse to our west. The Columbia Basin, places like that will probably be even warmer than us. They're kind of in the focus of it early on, but it's pretty concerning. And really, from a weather standpoint, heat is a significant cause of fatalities when it comes to weather. You hear about tornadoes and things like that, but heat kills more people than lightning, tornadoes, things like that. So we're worried about it. Just doesn't happen this badly in our area very often. It's usually the desert Southwest, and this is a hot one.
So it used to be considered the rainy month. Most of June would rain. So in terms of your records going way back, how does this compare?
Well, we've had certainly spells of hot weather toward the end of June in the past. Not as hot as this, or I think our all-time record's more in July time frame, and that's climatologically our hottest period is a month from now, toward the end of July. You're right. June is typically a wet month for us. We kind of count on May and June being wet for us. Ray will probably talk about drought here in a little bit, but that's what'll make this sort of historic. It's not just how hot it is, but it's unseasonably hot, But I think even this, Laurel, I think even these temperatures, if it was in our hottest time period, typically in late July, this would still be one we would be yelling about. We would really want to amplify the concern here.
Well, how its role in the whole drought scenario, Ray, and its overall impact.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had exactly the wettest spring, depending on where you are in Montana, but places like Missoula, Kalispell are doing a little bit better precipitation-wise for the months of May and June. But areas like Butte have, since January, only have half the amount of precipitation that they normally have. And there's a lot of areas across southwest Montana, eastern Montana that have just not had precipitation for this calendar year. We're looking at like half the amount of precip that they would normally have. So the precipitation that we've had so far has already led to drought across many sections of Montana, and it's intensified in certain areas worse than others that just haven't received the precipitation. But with this kind of a heat wave coming, that's certainly going to add to the situation. I mean, the evaporation. So, evaporation that you get from water surfaces is going to increase dramatically with this type of a heat wave. And the evapotranspiration, which is the water, the moisture that leaves the plants, the trees, all that kind of thing, is really going to increase with this. So that's going to, like I said, add to this drought problem. So we're already seeing problems with dryland farming in eastern Montana, and this is going to make that situation a lot worse. We're also seeing lots of rangeland where, the ranchers can't get out and graze their cattle because the grasses are stunted. So this is going to make that situation even worse.
What about river levels, fish, reservoirs out there?
Yeah, we are a little bit lucky as far as that's concerned, because this time of year, we're still seeing stream flows that are up there in water flows. We're not down to really extreme low levels now with our streams. We're still getting some real high elevation snowmelt coming into the rivers. So I think we're going to be okay from that standpoint. We'll see water temperatures certainly increase in the lakes and the rivers, but it shouldn't be an alarming situation yet.
Marty, your biggest concerns here as we look at the drought and this heat wave and coming in?
Well, it's a time scale thing, Laurel, and I'm glad you gave us a chance to talk about the heat wave, because in the Weather Service here in the field offices, we focus on the next 10 days or so, right? And here in a bit, we'll talk about maybe a summer outlook, and that's really our climate prediction center that focuses on that, the climatologists and whatnot. The big concerning thing here is that climatologically, you're right, June is our wet month, but usually the faucet shuts off, kind of at that last week of June or toward the end of June. And the concern with this forecast now is that that's it. Our last good rain event that we had that kind of soaked west central Montana might be it for precipitation. And I'm not saying we'll have some shower activity. We had a little bit of light rain this morning, but we don't see on the forecast a real slow moving wet weather system. And typically you don't get those in July around here. You can get some wet thunderstorms, but not enough to really, impact drought. So that's our concern, that this is really kicking off what we're going to see, kind of not the heat necessarily, but the dryness through July and August.
So let's go ahead and talk about the summer outlook and the drought outlook. And we could start with the drought. Go, Ray.
Yeah, currently across Montana, we're in some form of drought, whether it's just abnormally dry or severe type drought. We've got that in large sections of Montana currently. So eastern Montana in the areas where they're growing the wheat up in the Glasgow area, that area has, like I said, had half the precipitation that they would normally have for this time of year. So the whole area is classified in drought currently, and that's before we see this heat wave coming. So that, like I said, is going to only intensify. And as we go through, the months, the rest of June and into July and August, we expect the drought to intensify across all of Montana.
Is this here to stay for the next several years, or do you see an end in sight?
Typically in Montana, we do see, if we get into a good winter where we get some nice snow, and we get into the fall months where the precipitation picks up, we can see the drought improve. And typically, especially in western Montana, we rarely see a drought linger into the next year. That's not to say that couldn't happen, but as we go out into the future and then into next year, it's really the intensity of this drought is really going to be felt this summer. And then as we get into some cooler weather and in the fall and in the winter, then the impacts of the drought really diminish more. Now, if we just go into a period where we see lack of snowpack this winter, and the drought could certainly continue into next year for sure.
Yeah. Well, any positive indicators out there?
Right now, as far as, we look at the sea surface temperatures out in the Pacific Ocean, because they have such a large impact on the weather that we see across the Northwest and here into Montana. Right now, there's really no indication that we're going to be having what's called an El Nino or a La Nina event. So as we go into the fall and winter months, there's really no indication as to which way the weather is going to trend at this point. We do see that for this summer, we are expecting warmer and drier temperatures, like Marty was saying, as we go into July and August timeframes.
And Marty, you mentioned the summer outlook. Is that different than the drought outlook?
Well, it is. The Climate Prediction Center actually tries to predict temperature and precipitation just above normal, below normal, near normal conditions, right? Then when it comes to the drought outlook, humans actually get involved. So that's largely model driven. Then humans actually get involved. Just like the current state of drought, Ray is one of the folks who gives input to the drought authors. They look at a variety of different things, but humans actually draw the maps. So when it comes to the drought outlook, it's largely based on what Climate Prediction Center is forecasting, but humans can actually do some subjective decision making on where they expect it to improve and where they expect it to maintain or worsen.
Okay.
So.
And then there's also the fire weather outlook. Talk about that. What are we facing here?
Well, that's the folks who put out the official fire weather outlook are a group of meteorologists and fuel specialists called Predictive Services, and employed by the land management agencies. And so spread around to the different geographical areas. They all get together in the spring and try to figure out month by month what the fire season outlook. Of course, it's based on a lot of stuff Ray and I've already talked about, the current state of the drought, around and how they've affected the fuels is big, and then the forecasted weather, precipitation expectation, and temperature expectation really dictates a lot of it. But there's other nuances to fire season that are much, much tougher to predict. How much lightning we'll get in any given month. We're truly not good at looking out very far on the amount of lightning. So you try to look at patterns and whatnot. So generally, if you're expecting a dry forecast, you're not expecting a lot of moisture available to produce a lot of lightning. So maybe that could be the positive side of things. Because up here, fortunately, I guess I say fortunately, I think a lot of our starts are still produced by lightning, but there are certainly a lot of human-caused ignitions as well. So right now, the forecast, for June was about normal. Nothing saying it was going to be necessarily above or below normal. And that really, and I'm talking across western Montana and even in eastern Montana, That sort of depends on where I think in eastern Montana you are. They are seeing some fire activity east of the divide. Certainly that's a little ahead of schedule typically. But, as Ray mentioned, over here in west central Montana, we've been a bit of a drought-free island, if you will. So it's holding true. But with the forecast being warm and dry, they start spreading from, the Cascades eastward, that above normal expectation for fire season. So that holds for July. It spreads across the entire state and into North Dakota for August. Then they pull it back. September is often, the month where we'll see a season-ending event. Quite often, a change to a more moist pattern. Doesn't always happen that way. I think it's a little bit of optimism to say it'll be back to normal by September, given the July and August forecast. But I'm crossing my fingers that they're right. But sometimes our fire seasons aren't ended by a single event or a single pattern change. They sometimes fade away. And of course, that's when we really get the lingering smoke problems. Becomes even more impactful air quality when school starts back in session, things like that. So we're hoping that's not the case, but it's a little early to tell on that score.
Well, we're facing so much this summer. What tips or advice that you have for the public? What's most important for them to know, and how can we help?
Well, I'd like to start short term here with this heat wave upon us. A lot of people get, we're tough up here in Montana. We're pragmatic about the weather. It doesn't really bother us. But I think this heat wave coming up is a scenario where you need to really look at your plans. You need to change plans. You need to stay hydrated, of course. You need to be in the shade, but it's going to be hot in the shade. If you don't have air conditioning, try to figure something out. Friends who do, family who do, that sort of thing. Strenuous activities, do it in the morning. All those types of things. Another aspect of a heat wave that we find up here, Ray mentioned snowmelt, and that's still going on. That's still filling our rivers, right? Rivers and lakes are cold. We see a lot of hypothermic issues during heat waves because people escape to the water, or that's the day they decide to swim across the lake for the first time of the season, and they get out in the middle of the lake and their muscles don't work. Hypothermia starts to set in. We see more of that during these heat waves in the spring than any other time of year. So we want to watch for that. As the summer goes on, I think then it becomes really being fire wise, right? Making sure their homes are fire safe if they can. The things that they'll have land management agencies tell them all summer long about camping, being safe with your campfires, safe with your tow chains on your trailers, all those types of activities. Everybody needs to do their part to keep us out of the fire season as best they can, keep us out of the smoke season as best they can. Those types of things, Laurel, I think would help.
Ray, would you like anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think Marty touched on it from a water perspective. Is the rivers are still flowing at a pretty good height for. This time of year they're pretty close to normal. That means that, you could have some drownings take place if when you get this heat and you get into that fast flowing water. You could get into a situation where you could be in a bad shape on one of these rivers across western Montana, or even in eastern Montana too. So I think that's a concern. And then obviously what Marty was saying with the hypothermia in the lakes and rivers too. If you're in that water too long, that's going to be a continued problem. So if I was the public, I'd just be very, leery of that type of activity. Not saying you stay out of the water, but you got to be really careful.
Well, and then one thing I wanted to touch on was, of course, climate change. Where will we be in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Will we be seeing even more dramatic changes in the weather?
It's always hard to say on that, Laurel. And you mentioned where we'll be a year from now, 5 years, 10 years. That's probably the hardest thing, at least from my standpoint. I'm not an expert on climatology, meteorology, shorter term, but is the time scale involved? How will those changes come about? And more importantly, the impacts to to the folks. How will that change fire season? Will it make it, greater in magnitude, or will it just make it slowly longer fire seasons, and encroach upon our typical wet times of the year? Maybe they won't be as typically wet in the future. It's just a hard one to get our fingers around. It really is. We're having a hard time giving you exact straight answer what July is going to be, right? So to figure out what 10 years is going to be a tough one. But
sure.
One other thing I wanted to say real quick, Laurel, on the safety side of the summer is we will still see convection, right? We'll see our share of thunderstorms. Some years we have just happen to have a lot of strong, severe thunderstorms. Other years, like last year, we don't have a real strong convective season. But lightning safety is always something we worry about, and big downdraft wind safety, that sort of thing. We'll put out severe thunderstorms for hail as well, but it's pretty rare for us to get dangerous hail in this part of the country. You can get hail that might damage your car, things like that. But I'm more concerned about the wind when it comes to a thunderstorm, and then lightning. I think the average lightning, we still average about 25 lightning deaths in this country a year. That's down from about in the 30s and 40s, 10, 20 years ago. So we're not sure why. We hope that that's a safety message, that people are maybe respecting lightning a little bit more. You see a lot of lightning videos online, things like that. But indoors is the only way to be safe when it comes to lightning. Try to be indoors, and that can be a car as well. But you got to have good shelter.
Good
to be
to
safe
know.
from lightning.
Ray, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think trying to predict, we've seen the predictions from our Climate Prediction Center just about every summer saying the temperatures are going to be warmer. This summer, we just so happened to see that they're predicting drier also. But the signals that we see in the climate predictions year after year after year, at least in the summer months, are just warmer than they've normally been in the past. So, that certainly, like Marty said, is going to possibly lead to longer fire seasons. You got more evaporation coming out of the forests, and that makes them drier, more susceptible to fire. And that'll certainly be a concern as we move into the future.
Anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't touched on?
I'll just say one other thing about climate change, and too, like especially some parameters like snowfall, precipitation in general. There's so many shorter term cycles that we understand better than overall climate change. Like Ray mentioned El Nino, La Nina. That's just related to the equatorial sea surface temperatures and how that influences convection. Lots of convection in the equatorial Pacific can alter the storm track for our part of the world, our latitudes, and that'll play a big role in a snowpack on any given winter. So when they're looking at climate change, they can't really pick out, even one or two winters in a row and say it's changing much. They've got to look at a huge, and I'm sure that's why Yellowstone is looking at, thousands of years into the past. That's the only way you can really look at climate change type trends. There's much more, there's yearly cycles, there's decadal cycles, probably some, century-long cycles that we don't even fully understand yet, that sort of thing. So it's a tough thing to research, really, how, and probably precipitation, probably more so than temperatures, even because of its variability.
All right. Well, as we start to wrap up here, Ray, is there anything that you'd like to talk about that I didn't touch on?
Boy, I think you did a good job of covering, most of what's related to drought here in Western Montana, and all of Montana currently. And then, when we look at the entire Western United States, there's areas that are in a lot worse shape than what we are in Montana. Even if you go down into California, Arizona, Utah, that whole region, Nevada, even stretching over into Oregon and Washington, we've got, and Idaho, are just in some really, really severe drought situation. We're talking about, the lowest levels of lake levels that we've seen on Lake Mead down along the Colorado River. And the Colorado River produces water for Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Las Vegas. I mean, it just feeds the entire Southwest, and it's in a bad situation there. So this is one of the worst droughts I've seen for the entire Western U.S. in quite some time.
All right. Well, any final message for our followers?
Stay safe this summer.
Absolutely. Right.
Drink lots of water.
Yeah, stay hydrated is so important. And I that whole side of people cooling off in lakes and rivers, that's definitely concerning. Easy enough, like you said, with the hypothermia settling in, or your muscles cramping up from the cold water. So we'll make sure that we get that message out.
Great.
Thanks for having us, Laurel. We appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this.